All right, we're finishing up our intervention series, and we've been talking about these three lenses through which we engage with needs in the world. Missional focus, how we actually view our mission, moving from problem-based focus all the way up to a people-based focus. We talked about missional fruitfulness. Is this intervention actually producing meaningful fruit, or are we stuck in this idealism phase with good intentions that never actually produce lasting change? And then we talked about missional faithfulness. How deeply am I walking with those who are actually engaging in the work? Are we coming from this transactional approach, or are we deeply invested and engaged with those on the front lines in missional partnership? Now, we can grow in all three of these different lenses, but that growth looks different across each pathway. It's not necessarily linear, and we can be very deep in one and very shallow in another with a lot of room for growth. But they're all equally important in how we actually go about engaging in the world.
So let's use an example of a giver who is strong in faithfulness, but not paying attention to the fruitfulness. So this is someone who might say, I love this organization. I love their leaders. I've been supporting them for years, but I'm not really sure what impact they're having at all.
Yeah, now there's a lot to celebrate in what's going on in this kind of a situation, which I think is actually a very common situation. If you look right at the top, the giver is honoring the people in the ministry over the work that they produce, right? We're humanizing those who are in the trenches. We're not seeing them as simply means to an end. And that's very biblical. Just like the people that we're hoping to serve, the people that are engaging in that work are people too. And it's also our responsibility to love and care for them. There's also an element of longevity, that this giver is sticking through hard times, good times. They've been there through it all. The challenge in this kind of a situation is that there are very real scenarios where you could be giving for years or even decades to a ministry to one day find out that ultimately very little was ever really accomplished. That could look a couple different ways. It could be that it comes to light that projects in the field ultimately fall apart or are abandoned at some point with no lasting change. It could look like accountability, that finances are just not being stewarded wisely or might intentionally be misused. These are the kind of experiences that givers can have that really shake up that idealism phase and force you to choose really one of two paths, either to dig in through introspection and investigation, really trying to understand what happened and what needs to happen in the future to actually have meaningful impact and lasting change. Or givers will just close up entirely and say, I don't want to ever experience something like that again. I'm done giving for now. And so that's what we want to avoid by not engaging in fruitfulness.
So if you find yourself with deep faithfulness to an organization, but you're not clear on what impact the work is having, the easiest place to start is to have a conversation. Clearly, you've developed a relationship, and I think it's fair to ask, is this working? It's not an accusation. It's not suggesting that there's been a lapse in accountability, but it invites an honest look at the actual fruitfulness. Being faithful to an organization or its leaders does not require us to ignore the reality. Many times this conversation can actually strengthen your relationship.
Yeah, and I think one thing that givers don't realize is that to the degree that you feel some kind of personal responsibility to a ministry or to specific leaders in that ministry because of a relationship you've built over many years, in that same sense, you also likely have a little more weight and meaning to the things that you might ask or question because of that foundation that you've built relationally. And it's okay to engage in that it is a two-way conversation. And we talked about this idea of solidarity in relationship as also creating room for vulnerability, that when you have a really strong relational foundation, you actually create the safe space to have some of these conversations that can seem scary in a sense, both for giver and for leaders and ministries. And I think that walking through that door is what takes the relationship even to the next level.
Now, just because we're not receiving data from the organization about their impact doesn't mean they don't care about it. There could be a number of different reasons why there's a breakdown in reporting, but one of my favorite strategies that I've heard is for a donor to actually come alongside an organization and help provide resources to do the reporting. We've gotten to know some wonderful resources that can help provide this service, like Radiant Global Insights or Impact Builder, that can be hired to help an organization improve their theory of change, understand what to measure, and how to go about it. And as a giver, you can help facilitate this connection and bring your own focus on fruitfulness. And we've actually heard of givers covering the cost of these services, which then benefits both the ministry and the giver, who are both now having a much deeper understanding of their impact.
Yeah, the givers who first shared that strategy were sharing it from this exact situation, having walked deeply with a ministry over a long period of time, but unsure as to the fruitfulness because there just wasn't data to back up the work that was being done. Now, there can be some situations where there may be either strong resistance to any kind of measurement or data collection, or that as you start to go about that process, the data that comes back is very concerning, and a ministry is not willing to adjust their model or their theory of change to address that. And in some of those cases, it may ultimately be best for the relationship to find a better fit. That's obviously not a conversation anybody wants to have, but there are some best practices for how to go about that. We've posed this exact scenario to numerous givers over the years, and I think the points that stand out clearest are avoid surprises. If you have been giving faithfully with an organization for years or decades, try very hard not to cut off your funding overnight. There should be layers of conversation involved, and when at all possible, there should be an opportunity to adjust or correct course, and there should be grace to allow for some of that back and forth conversation. But if it's really not possible to move forward, then provide lots of lead time. If you've been giving monthly, that might look like 3 or 6 months of lead time to say, hey, we're going to be phasing down our giving over this time. We want to let you know so that you can make the necessary adjustments and account for that in how you allocate any expenses. There is a loving way to do that that doesn't have to leave a bitterness. I have been through some of that myself, even for small levels of support, and it is always met with appreciation.
Now let's take a look at the reverse of this first scenario, where as a giver, you have strong fruitfulness and limited faithfulness. So you've taken a step back, you've evaluated the work being done, and you're clear on the theory of change, you understand what's being measured, and you're seeing meaningful change happen throughout time. But you haven't built much of a relationship with the people in the organization itself.
Yeah, this one's interesting, and I think also not too uncommon. For someone who is very focused on results and numbers, the relationship can almost feel like a secondary thing, and actually can sometimes feel like a barrier. Like if I have too much connection to one ministry, it might cause me to overlook ministries that are even more effective, and I need to be able to pivot quickly and easily in order to keep my giving as impactful as possible. So this is like a high impact transactional approach to giving. And there's a good heart behind it, wanting to be very wise and careful stewards of the giving that we do. But I do think it comes at a cost. We talked in the other example about how depth of relationship and partnership over a long period of time allows for more honest and fruitful conversations between ministry and giver. There develops a level of trust and vulnerability that's possible because of the relationship. That trust itself can provide the room to encourage and challenge ministries to ever increasing levels of effectiveness in how they work And it actually creates the space to understand on a deeper level how that work is done. When there is a level of fear, then it's natural for ministries to want to put walls up and protect themselves from anything that might put them in a negative light. But when we look at how Jesus interacts with the disciples or anybody else that he sent on his behalf to carry out his mission, he did so with incredible depth of grace and commitment to developing and strengthening and transforming those that he sent.
If you find yourself in this situation where you feel really good about the impact of the work being done, but you haven't built any relationships with the people doing the work, once again, the easiest first step is going to be communication. Depending on the size of the organization, who you reach out to might be different. For a smaller organization, you may be able to reach out directly to the president or executive director and spend some time building that relationship. For a large organization, it might be someone in your region who cultivates relationships with ministry partners in that area. Many ministries offer opportunities to volunteer, where you're getting alongside other givers and workers in the ministry, which is a great way to form meaningful, lasting relationships. And even if the organization doesn't have a formal volunteering opportunity, think about what skills you already have, either personally or professionally, that might really benefit the organization. We've heard of engineers, accountants, doctors, all finding ways to contribute their skills, connections, and influence to further the ministry. And finally, if the organization offers any opportunities to see the work in the field, it has the potential to really build your faithfulness as you get to know not just the workers, but the people who are benefiting from the work. So let's look at one more scenario where, as a giver, you have a strong emphasis on fruitfulness, but a limited focus in your giving. And this is where you have really good impact data, but you're looking at the work from a problem-based approach.
Yeah, so this might be looking at the problem of the need for clean water and partnering with an organization that has excellent data about their wells or water delivery systems, and that has really refined how they deliver water to a community in a way that lasts and provides resources for many years. But when you look at the model, there's no space for the gospel in that work. Now, on one hand, there's the point of view that ministries should be very narrow in their focus and be good at just one thing, to specialize in a sense. But that brings us back to these stages of missional focus that we've covered, moving from problem-based approach to pattern-based, to place-based, to partnership-based, and finally to people-based. If our goal is back in this problem-based phase, then we will always see success as how much clean water is provided. As we move forward to this final people-based approach, and if we have true love and compassion for those being served as Christ followers, that leads to a natural desire for them to also experience living water. We know that when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, Lazarus went on to die again, but it was because of his relationship with Jesus that he was able to experience a whole new level of life. And as we grow in love for the people that we seek to serve through our giving, there grows a natural desire to see them transformed in all of the dimensions of their life, with their relationship with God and their understanding of their identity as image bearers of Christ, for their relationship with others, and for their relationship with their role as stewards of creation. And as we seek to see people multidimensionally transformed, our focus in ministry changes.
So as a giver, if you're seeing really strong impact in a narrow focus area, I think it's worthwhile to step back and consider how there might be opportunities to take a more integrated approach to love and serve people. So in this clean water example, if we compare several ministries, we don't want to compromise on fruitfulness. We still want highly impactful work to be done. But are there organizations that empower people across multiple dimensions? A great example is an organization that effectively provides clean water solutions and then uses that open door as an opportunity to share the gospel.
Now, we've talked about three very different but powerful lenses for how we engage with needs in the world. And you may be starting at very different levels on each of these lenses. Just like everything else that we've talked about, growth in intervention first has to do with understanding where you're starting from. So take a moment to step back, think through these different growth stages that we've talked about across these three lenses of focus, fruitfulness, and faithfulness. Think through the partners that you've worked with in the past and that you work with currently. As you begin to understand where you're starting from, then it begins to become clear where your next step might be. Of course, we want to constantly be growing and moving towards deeper levels in all three of these lenses. But realistically, that's going to look different in different seasons and with different partners. And so just find where the next best step is in moving forward in focus, in fruitfulness, or in faithfulness. And just take that one step.
So that takes us to the end of our series on intervention. Our prayer is that as you grow in focus, faithfulness, and fruitfulness, you have a meaningful improvement in your experience of giving.